All right, everyone ready?
Yep.
Okay. Welcome. I've installed Puppet. Now what? Hopefully you read it that way in your head when you read the description. I'm Gabriel Schuyler. I actually work for Puppet. We just decided to change our name from Puppet Labs to Puppet, so if I say Puppet Labs, it's a vestige. I work in professional services at Puppet, which means that I get to fly around to a different city every week and train people, or get their infrastructure set up with them, or get them unpainted from a corner. I wrote this talk because people sometimes need a crash course. And when I do trainings, what we call fundamentals, that takes 3 days. So we're going to pack that all into just the necessities. So I am also sort of doing my slides off a PDF here, so there won't be me clicking my remote. So it'll be a little jumpy, but I need this space for terminals. So here's me. And this is one of my favorites. I really dislike overplanning. It's possible to sit down and decide you're going to install Puppet and then spend 2 months not because you're trying to figure out all the possibilities, or because you've looked at our docs site and you've seen huge pages on how to do it. It's really not that tough. And I'm a fan of automation, so someday my robot army is going to take over the world. I have written this for beginners in mind. You don't need to know anything. We're not going to do anything all that complex. We're going to go with examples, so we won't actually be writing too much. I might, but I expect that you're a beginner. Are you beginners, or some of you showing up because it's in your environments and you need to figure it out? Okay, cool, good, awesome. So it's all going to be by example, and my assumption is that you need to do something right now. That you may have a master and you want to learn how to code and all that kind of stuff, but if you could just set up NTP on all of your machines, that would be enough for Monday. So hopefully you're welcoming the robot army as well. All right. So if anybody wants to bail, now is your chance before we get into the real stuff. All right. Here's generally how Puppet works. It's a master and it's an agent. Or if you're in a really big enterprise, it's multiple masters. You can load balance them. It's all stateless. They don't care. And this is how a run goes. The agent starts up. It's demonized. Every 30 minutes it wakes up. You can change that interval. You can add splay, whatever you like. But by default, it's going to wake up every 30 minutes and run something called factor. I'll keep a running list of my commands here, just in case you're playing along at home. Does anybody have a virtual machine running and they're going to be typing this in and making sure? Okay, you're my syntax checkers. And factor looks something like this. What it does is it collects everything it knows about itself. The agent is going to need to tell the master who it is, and there we go. I'm running like 8 different virtual machines right now. And it's very basic stuff. I have these disks. There's my floppy drive. There's my first SCSI drive. All right. Things I might need to know when I'm configuring stuff. Let's see. There's one of my favorites, is virtual. This comes really in handy, especially if you are going to set up NTP. If I'm virtual, I don't care if my clock goes and skews all the way out. I might have been asleep. So I woke up, it's 4 days ago, I don't want NTP to go and quit. But if I'm physical, there's a problem. Basics, am I on Linux, or it could be Darwin or Windows or something like that. This is LinuxFest, so forget them. How much memory I have, if I'm going to configure, maybe I've got Tomcat and I have to configure how much of an initial heap and a maximum heap it's going to have. This is handy, divide by 2 and throw it into the starting size. And a bunch of other stuff. When you really get into this, you'll write your own facts for Factor to do. We're going to go through some modules, and modules tend to have custom facts in them. So if I'm configuring Java, it's useful to know what JDK version I've got before I go and I configure things, and there are differences in the configuration files. And this is Factor. Bunch of stuff. Even has the host SSH key, so I can pre-populate other machines with it. And here it's telling me the hypervisor, which is also useful. Factor runs, collects all those facts about the machine and stuff that I'm going to need to configure it. It sends those into the master. The master takes those facts, those are the only thing it knows about the agent, and it uses them to compile a catalog of desired state. The catalog comes back to the agent, and the agent applies it. It looks at the desired state, it looks at its current state, and it fixes any drift if it needs to. So, desired state, here's what I mean. My last job before Puppet, I worked at Sony PlayStation in the game development studios, which was, it's fun. We had a library of every game ever made, but also it's work, so, that was the one in San Diego. And we had a guy in the help desk, Chad, who was very smart, but he was getting tired of fixing people's laptops. He knew plenty about computers, but he didn't really know about servers yet. And he wanted to be part of the sysadmin team rather than kind of the drudgery that he was finding in help desk. Not all help desks are like that, but Sony's is. So they put him in an office with me. We had tons of technical debt. And they said, okay, Gabe, you teach Chad how to do all this stuff. So we would have conversations like this. On that type of server, you need to make sure that this package is installed. That's a desired state. If it's not there, I want it to be there. Chad didn't know anything about the commands yet. He learned really fast. But he needed to help out with this one and learn these a little later. You know that commands differ on different machines. Different platforms can do different stuff. So, in comes Puppet. When I said I need this package to be installed, this is how I say it in Puppet code. So, this is your first look at Puppet code. This is a resource. This is the smallest little atomic thing that I might want to manage on a machine. So a package, a file, a service, a user, those are all the individual things that I tell Chad that he needs. That service should be running. In Puppet talk, they all have a type and a title, and then these are called attributes. This is the desired state of this type of resource called this one. The nice thing for a beginner like Chad is that the work of enforcing this is sorted out by Puppet. And that's called a provider, is the command that actually does it, or the system, or whatever you're messing with in the proc area. That is dealt with by a provider. Different platforms have different commands. Let's see, what am I doing? Adding packages here. And you're used to them, yum, at. Maybe you're not used to MSI exec. It depends on what your life is like. But to install a package on a system, I can say that to Chad. He doesn't know the commands. Puppet actually will sort that out. I can tell Puppet, install this package, and it'll sort it out, or make sure that it's not there, and it'll sort it out. There is a command on the command line, and I can show it off. And it's the Puppet resource command. This is going to ask Puppet to sort it out, to tell me what the current state of the system is. Also at PlayStation, we had a smart guy named Kevin who managed the render farms. But then he got promoted, but he was the only one who knew how to run the render farms and set them up. He was a kind of do-it-yourselfer, or he was sort of an endorsed shadow IT. But once he got promoted, he still had to deal with the render farms because he couldn't describe to anyone how to set one up. He had a wiki page which kind of went through the commands. Every once in a while he would look at one failing and he would say, oh, well, I forgot to say I need to add that user. But did he edit his wiki page? No, he remembered it. But until he could hand off this task to someone else, he was stuck. So we gave him a space in our version control system that Puppet was using and showed him the Puppet resource command. He could now go through his wiki and say, all right, my first step is to install a package called something. So Puppet resource package, and let's just say NTP for instance. And this returns real Puppet code. I'm going to suspend one of the bigger ones. There we go. It's not installed. If the package provider on the system had said that it had been installed and it was removed, this would say absent. I know these, but you don't. Let me show you how I know them. docs.puppetlabs.com. I guess we're docs.puppet.com these days. That's what's called a type reference. And this lists every type of type that's built in. When we play with the modules, we're going to extend that. But these are the ones that you can use on any old Puppet agent without having to extend it at all. You'll see that some of these are platform specific. You can only use them on the platform that can support them. So I've got things like a Yum repo, which only works on a Red Hat-ish system or something that uses Yum. I know people have convinced other distros to do it. Of course, Yellow Dog does it, used to. But things like a file, you can pretty much do anywhere. Now, systems may differ in how they do that. That's a different provider for it. But I get to say abstractly, make a file exist and have certain content. That's the Puppet resource command. There's got to be a more interesting package. There we go. Telling me what version it's got. And for someone like Kevin, he could copy that, paste it right into, we gave him a single space for all the code. It was kind of a mess, but he could get his systems puppetized real easily. The flip side is the Puppet apply command. And this lets me either apply, it works on standard in, so I can either hand it a file or I can do one of these and I can tell it what state I need. Now this is just for testing. This is not changing what the master is going to say the agent should do. But when you're Kevin, it's pretty handy to be able to test things out. So there are your first two commands. Puppet resource takes a type and a title. For some types, you can leave off the title. Things that are finite in general. And it'll list them all. And then Puppet apply lets you test some code that you've done in an ad hoc sort of basis. But remember, it doesn't tell the master anything about want. It's just doing it locally. All right. It would get tedious to keep telling Puppet, install this package, install this file, install this service. Those belong together. So what Puppet offers me is what we call a class, which is a block of resources that belong together. Here I'm telling Chad, or I'm telling Puppet, I need to set up this thing. I need to set up NTP. And I get to say that instead of I need to set up the package NTP and the file ntp.conf and the service ntpd should be run. Class lets me put all that together, and I'm going to tell Puppet, include this class on a particular node that needs it. And again, give me 1 second because I've got my notes in one page and I've got my slides in another, and they are not connected. So here we go. Very common. Package, ensure it's installed. File, make sure it's a file. Here, I'm telling Puppet to generate it from a template. And this service should be running, and enable just means set it so that it'll automatically start at boot using whatever provider is out there. Is it systemd? Is it Upstart? Is it the Windows service interface? I don't care. Puppet knows how to do it. And if it doesn't, I can write code to teach it, but we're not going to get into that. So far, so good. But I'm missing one thing, which is I know what order to do these in. I know that if the config file changes, I better restart the service. But Chad doesn't, and Puppet actually doesn't. And here's the thing, is when I tell Chad, install a package before you bother configuring it. If the config file changes, restart the service. Something I know, he doesn't know, but Puppet also doesn't want to know unless it's explicitly needed. Puppet tries to do as much as possible. It's really it's a little plucky little thing, and it will try to do as much as possible. I've listed a whole bunch of resources by the time I'm really going, and just because I couldn't set up sudoers the way that I wanted doesn't mean I don't want to set up the firewall. Just because I don't have my etc motd file generated from a template properly doesn't mean that I don't want to change the root password or lock it, depending on where you are. So Puppet does things in whatever order is convenient for it. The ordering, newer Puppet, this will accidentally go in this order, but it won't restart the service. Puppet's not psychic, and after all, some files don't need a restart of the service. So Puppet does as much as it can by only caring about explicit dependencies. And it's done with attributes to these resources. You've got 4 of them that have 2 styles of each. You have before, which says this needs to be managed successfully before you bother with this one. You have require, which flips it. I would say this file requires the successful management of this package. And here I've got what's called a refresh relationship. This file, if it changes, should notify the service to refresh. And that makes the service restart. You can also refresh things like mount points or single commands if you like. The flip side to that is subscribe. This service could subscribe to some other resource. And if this is managed, remanaged, then do a refresh event, restart the service. And I'll write those down. And I'll give you a heads up, which is that these can be abbreviated, and you'll see this sometimes in code. Before can be abbreviated with an arrow, just a hyphen and an angle bracket. Notify can be done with a tilde and an angle bracket. You will never see it, but there's a shorthand for these that you can imagine is the other direction. And if you ever do that to your coworkers, you're being kind of evil. This is not an obfuscated coding contest. Okay. So that's resources. I'm going to group them into a class. Now, along comes the day where I have to violate Peterson's law, which is don't be special. And there's some system that needs to be a little special. So I say, I need to set up this system. But the config file is a little different on some systems. What you're going to see in Forge modules and what you'll write eventually is this. You'll put parentheses at the start, kind of like a function, and say which parameters this class can have changed. These are the parameter names, and on the other side of the equal sign are the defaults to fall back to. If you don't have a default, it has to be passed in. Most commonly, they will have defaults. And then I can use it later on in the class. And it's not that I hate you people, it's that the mic's here, so I can't walk over to that one. I can. But I'm going to point at this one. So here's my class with a package, a file, and a service. And some systems are different. You can imagine continuing with my NTP example, you may have a different time server. Some machines get one, some get another. The Stratum ones get themselves. So I'll need to change things when I say include NTP on this. So perhaps I'm using this parameter in my template generation. Templates can see these variables. And perhaps I'm deciding on my ensure of the service running or not based on some other parameter. Sensibly, I'm defaulting to running. And that's really classes right there. It is a block of resources that I'm going to apply together to a system. And I'm able to give a class parameters on the way in so that it'll set things up in a particular way. But I tend to have sensible defaults somewhere, as long as I'm being a nice person. All right. Next up is defined types. And now I'm going to start to, should have had a build slide, that would have been nice. Here's my class. I'm going to shrink it down into a section, which is here. So now the class is over here. What I'm going to talk about next is what we call a defined type. A class is great for setting up such and such system. And that's something that I do once to a system. I don't try to install NTP more than once. I don't try to install Apache more than once. Some places do. But sometimes I have a block of resources that I need to reuse. So if you are Apache or Nginx or whatever admins, you're familiar with setting up virtual hosts, which is really just, I need a directory to exist and an extra custom configuration file that says if somebody requests my machine by this name, pull out of this directory. Some people aren't web admins, so I'll explain. Your NTP configuration, you might have key files for each of your servers. That's something that's reusable. You know that you need to create a file for that, and you're going to generate it from a template, but you may need multiple copies of that. So a defined type lets me specify a block of resources to reuse with a variation each time I do it. And my example is just two files. Looks like I'm talking about a virtual host here, which is make sure a directory exists and make sure the config file exists generated from a template. A defined type, similar to a class, takes attributes. Some of the documentation or blog posts will call these parameters when I'm creating it. A resource type has a type and a title, file called this, and when I use an instance of this defined type, it will also have a title. So here are the attributes I can take. On the other side of the equal sign are the defaults. And frequently, one of them will just default to the title when you're using it. You can think of this like a macro, I suppose. If my main arguments to a class are, maybe those are they're similar to a command line argument. This is sort of like using a macro. So those are reusable blocks that I'm going to need. Also note, if I use one of these, I'm using a notify so that if I do add a directory with a file, or if this ever needs to change, it'll restart the service. So a virtual host, you might want to restart the service. An NTP key, I'm not sure it really cares. All right. So I've written some code. I've got a main class that sets up the thing. I've got defined types to make instances of the thing. And I go to my Puppet user group and I show everybody all this awesome code and they say, hey, can you get a copy? I would like to have a way to tar this all up and just hand it to them. And Puppet also likes to know where to find things. So what I do is I arrange my code, my files, my templates, everything that goes into set up that thing into one directory. On the Puppet master, it'll be in a modules directory. I'm not going to get into the master too much. I want to do stuff. And there will be a directory named after whatever I'm setting up. This main class. In there, manifests is where code goes. Files is static files. Templates is things that I'm going to generate from a template using ERB. And if you are extending Puppet, your code will go into the lib directory to add custom facts, or you can actually write functions to run on the master during catalog compilation time. Way advanced. I've also got one more piece going on here, which is that in a module you will generally see a params class named after the main class. What this does is tends to set up sensible defaults based on operating system. You can imagine something like SSH. The package has different names on different platforms, or the service has a different name on different platforms. So if I first write my class like this, it'll take parameters, and maybe the parameters are things like package name, or whether the service should be running or not. I want to be able to customize them, but at my start, they're hardwired. And then somebody comes along and says, I want this also to work on Debian, and I'm about to get a pull request, and here's how they do it. This class can take these parameters, or it'll default to the other side of the equal sign. And the default is, take a look in the params class, where there's a case statement around the operating system family. OS family is a fact from factor. Based on that, change the default for this. So I'm able on any special system to say include this and just use the defaults, or I can include it and change the defaults. But the result is, and this is the survival Puppet part here, is that when I include a class on a node, it'll have a sensible default based on operating system. So we make things a little more intelligent there. And when you decide that something's different for Raspbian, you fork the project, you add another case statement in here with some sensible default there, and then your pull request, and now upstream they fix it.
Can that be host name specific as well?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it can be anything that factor knows. So all of this stuff, and there is a factor host name, fqdn, and everything's wrapped up in SSL. And so there's also one for your SSL certificate name. If you're auto-scaling, sometimes your host name doesn't actually match what it did at the start. When we set up SSL on an agent at its first boot, that's now burned into it. So sometimes you'll need to refer to the SSL certificate name because the host name is going totally random. That's it. You now know everything about Puppet. We're going to look at Forge modules, and you're going to see this pattern over and over. There's a main class where I tell Puppet, set this thing up, maybe with some specialness. There's a params class where I'm calculating the sensible defaults based on things like operating system family. When I'm setting up NTP, is virtual is one of the things I might care about. And Factor even knows things like what type of chassis it's got, so you might change some of your NTP settings based on that. You'll have defined types, which allow for reusable blocks. A class contains things that are just once. Let's get started. Defined types say I need to reuse, like a cookie cutter, a bunch of things. When you're going through the code, you're going to find them in this layout. All the code is in manifests. All the files, static files are in files, templates, holds, dynamically generated templates. All right. Questions so far? What else do we got?
Would it be safe to assume that there are certain phases that are going to be operating asynchronously within a particular class?
No, there's no parallelization. They'll always happen in an order with only predictably what you've said to do in which order.
Then what's the explanation when you have a before? Is that supposed to be some sort of a flag, or if it wasn't there, it would just operate?
The before says,
Yeah.
if I can't manage this, don't try to manage this. And if I change something about this on a notify, tell this service to restart.
Okay, so they're just flags.
Yeah, yeah. They're what we call attributes.
In the param section, are you missing a closing curly brace for Debian, or am I reading that wrong?
Yes, I am.
What kind of feedback do you get? Like if things don't, if one of the preconditions can't be fulfilled, and you've got a server, you've got a couple machines, so how are you finding out about this?
What Puppet does after every run is it sends a report back to the master. And you can tell the master to do whatever you like with the report. But the standard ones are to store the output of the report on the file system on the master. If you have multiple ones, sometimes people will just have an NFS mount. And if you're running Puppet Enterprise, you've got a console, graphical console. If you're running the Foreman, that's also got a console that's taking reports in. So an agent does its run, sends a report to the master. The master, we've instructed the master in our config file what to do with the report. And it's common to just store it, and then at night you might actually just pull them all and run some sort of huge script of doom to summarize. If you're running on the command line, you'll see it on standard out and standard error. Also popular to have reports go into syslog. Yeah.
I have a process that sometimes can take 3 or 4 or 5 hours to do something. Is there a timeout or a best practice for dealing with something where you know it's not going to take a millisecond, it's going to take
Yeah,
hours?
there's a timeout that you can set in the Puppet conf file. I think the default is that a resource can only take 5 minutes, but I'm not sure.
How would you handle something that would 99% of it takes milliseconds and something that takes 5 hours to process?
Interesting. You could, if it was me and I had 1 million servers, I would let the run take that long. The connection to the master is all stateless, so I send my facts, I get the catalog of desired state, and then I disconnect and do it. This side.
One question, obviously it's going to the master. If I can see, okay, here's a class we're setting up the machine, can I see it isolated if that's the machine, that's the log, what happened?
Yeah, if you're storing the logs, those go into individual files. And if you've got some sort of console, you can generally click to see.
So is the default behavior that a service is notified to restart? Is that just something that's already defined? So
Yeah.
there's like a notified behavior for different types of resources?
Yeah, it's up to the provider. The provider has methods, and if it knows how to refresh, it has the method, and so a notification goes to that method.
Okay, and then it'll just handle it however it's defined.
Yeah, however it's been told.
All right.
Yeah.
I wonder if they're aware that class default is coming from, because it looks
Sure.
like the def refers to the params,
Mhm.
but it doesn't. I don't see where that's defined. What the default is to the parameters.
Okay. Oh, yeah, okay. So what I've got is a parameter, for instance, called JKL here that's going to default to whatever's in here. And here, I've got a case statement that each operating system family is just setting the variable.
Right. What about the variable above it, DEF?
Not bothering with that one in this example.
Oh, okay.
I only have
But I
this
just
much
saw that
space.
it refers to params, but I don't see where.
Oh yeah, sorry. I should make notes on these things. What did I have? Closing brace on Debian. And no parameter for ABC. Okay.
You're like a puppet.
What about the
Compiler.
Yeah, you're a parser check.
Well, while we're doing that, you're referring to file abcd.conf, which is referred to nowhere else. So if it's supposed to be abc in the class,
It is.
just
Thank you. Here's the command you're all running for me, which is puppet parser validate. All right. Let's see. File.
yeah, the before refers to abcd.
Oh, boo. Thank you.
Yeah.
Cool. Good. I don't think most crowds would notice that stuff. Anything else before I go? Yeah.
So I'm assuming that the client requires root access to run, correct?
It is way easier if it does, yeah.
So
But
you could, in theory, set it up so you don't need root access.
absolutely, yeah. And some people will just install the agent without a master, and they're tired of setting up their bash RC a million times, and they'll just hand it enough code to do it. So you can run as non-root. I've been on gigs where they've asked for non-root runs, and then they needed to do things like restart services, and eventually the security team who had said you can't run as root said our sudoers file is getting enormous. So go ahead. But you can do it, yeah.
Can you just use a security group? I mean, could you have a group that was called Puppet and then just add people to the Puppet group who are supposed to be in there?
The trick is running the agent is the issue. Is
running the agent as a service, or are they manually calling?
just on the command line.
So manually calling the agent then from the command line. So
Okay.
a user would be typing that. Could the user not be added to the Puppet group that then has sudo applied to that group?
Oh, sure, yeah. Yeah,
And
more
that way
commonly.
sudo only has the entry for the Puppet
Yeah.
group, and then you just manage the group members as required.
Usually
the
what-
point was that if you don't want to run the agent itself
Yeah.
as root, you need to give sudo for every command Puppet will run, and there's a lot of them.
Yeah, it's kind of, it gets gross. Yeah.
So, it seems like the server landscape has changed radically in the last few years from hardware, physical box to VMs, now Docker containers. How does Puppet, what what's a good way for Puppet to like work with Docker containers? Is that?
Yeah,
It's not.
I'll generally hold questions like that aren't about the language, but the way that you would do it is either Puppet manages your Docker system entirely, or you create instances which then run some Puppet to set themselves up. So whichever way you like.
Also,
There's
we'll talk about that at 2:15.
Oh, okay, cool. Good. All right. Let's continue. Let's suppose we took the red pill and we're ready to use some of this stuff. Did you see anybody run out when we got here? Okay. All right. So I need to tell Puppet when a node checks in, it includes certain things. Not every machine needs Apache set up on it. So as a node checks in, it needs to have what we call a classification. This is traditionally kept in a file called site.pp. It's in your main code path under the manifests directory, just to make things a little confusing, but it's code, so it belongs in one called manifests. And all the way back through Puppet 3 and beyond, you had a file called site.pp, and it defines nodes. There are 3 ways that a node can be defined, and when you check in, Puppet is going to look in this order. First, do I have an exact match based on the certificate name, whatever this machine was originally called when it first booted? If I do, include a bunch of classes, generally, and we'll do that for fun in a second. And then that's it. That's the node's definition. If I don't find one for the exact certificate match, take a look for a regular expression. If one of those matches, include the classes. I haven't explained the syntax yet. Include the classes, and then that's it. If I don't have one of those, there's a node default. Frequently this is empty, but sometimes people, if they have a machine that's not classified, they still want to lock down a couple of things. So if they ran and they hadn't gotten around to adding one of these, they still want something to happen sometimes. If you fall through certificate name, regular expression, all the way down to default, this is what you get. Specifically note, default doesn't get inherited by any other node definitions. It is not things that add on, it's just the fallback. That's what you get. Some sites will actually even have a fail function in there, which tells the master to fail catalog compilation, don't even send back a catalog, and log something. So they figure if a machine comes online and they don't know what it is, they don't want it to be able to get anything. And now you know everything. So Chad could now look through all this and figure out how systems were set up and what pieces were on them without even having to ask. Kevin, we gave him a regular expression that said if your name is render followed by 4 digits, you include this junk. And that junk was stuff that Kevin wrote. And then you can fall through to this one. I do like to throw a fail in there, some places don't. And you only get one node definition. You already checking to see how long this one is?
No. Everything I'm going to today is here, so I'm just plotting what's.
Oh, nice. All right. You should set up a tent or something. Lawn chair, beer cozy. All right, so that's what we're going to do. We're going to apply classes to nodes. We're going to do it in the site.pp. If you're using the enterprise console, you can set that up in there. If you're using Foreman, you're setting that up in there. But we'll use the site.pp to be open sourcey because I like open sourcey. You set something up by including it. Params is going to give you sensible defaults. And we'll have cookie cutters. How's that look?
Is the notify, is that always a restart, or is that just the default?
It depends on how the provider has implemented it. Oh no, I'm losing one already. Oh, okay.
So if it knows reload, it could reload.
Yeah, so however you've written the method, for a service is to restart it, for a mount is to remount it. For an exec, which we'll see, which is just run some command, it'll rerun the command. So it's however you like.
On the next slide there, you had something that looked like a specification for a snowflake,
Mm-hmm.
the middle one.
Yep,
right?
that's the middle one.
So that's how you set something special for one particular or some set of machines.
Yes. Yeah, what I'm doing here, this one just gets all the defaults and include. And then if I do it like this, which coincidentally is a type and a title and attributes, I'm setting a parameter as I include it. And then this one is also just take the defaults. And enterprise or foreman, you'll set parameters in there if you like.
Are the certificates, those are loaded to the master when you attach the agent, right?
Mm-hmm.
Are those shared between multiple masters?
Mm-hmm. No. Here's what you do. You have a master, and I'll try to boom so that the mic can hear me. At least to start in your world. What happens is that on the first run of the agent, it generates an SSL key pair. The public and the private. On its first run ever, it sends those in. Well, it sends one in as a certificate signing request. It's now up to you to sign it. And there is one master that's signing them. If you only have one master, it's your only master. So it's signing them. On the next run, those get, the signed one gets sent back. And, along with the CA certificate. And now the agent knows whose signature to trust. Any other master, its certificate has been signed by the CA. The master has two sets of keys. It has one for itself as a machine, and then it also has one for the CA. So as long as every master is signed by the CA, you're fine, which is really handy when you're trying to do a Puppet 3 to 4 migration. So you can make a second master, sign it on the CA, and now all the agents will trust it. It's also kind of interesting to note, we are really paranoid. A master will not talk to an agent that doesn't have a signed certificate. So you can't do the age-old, boy, it's been 10 years at least now since they hacked Apache, where somebody pretended to be a backup server. You can't do that anymore. So Puppet won't say, your desired state is that you have free access to copy all these mounts.
So if you have 5 masters, you install them all at once?
Yes, unless you're crazy. Some banks have a security department that's like, has to be highly available. Since this only happens on the first run of an agent, you seriously do not need a second CA.
What if there's a failure?
If there's a failure, new agents won't be able to get signed, but all other agents and masters will be fine because they know to trust the CA certificate. Yeah.
How long is that certificate signed for? Is it
By default, it's 5 years.
Okay.
You can set it to whatever you like.
Does it renew automatically, or does
Nope. No. So you would have to regenerate and re-sign. So some places that are paranoid will set the expiration to something like 1 year for the first year. And then then they'll change it back closer to the default, which is 5 years. Yeah.
Have you ever seen an environment where Puppet was used to manage disaster recovery?
Mm-hmm.
Failovers?
Yes. Yes. What's really cool is that now that you know exactly how to set up each node, you can have a disaster recovery site that gets the same exact classification. And then now your copies of each thing all have the same includes with the same parameter set, and so it works.
What I mean to say is, have you ever had Puppet actually manage a disaster recovery scenario?
Oh, the failover?
The actual incident that it detected and it recovered?
Nope. Nope. Puppet, we only do what we can do well. And so checking on current service state, the only things we do around that are the application orchestrator, where we actually care about current state and that something is finished over here. We don't have any monitoring. And also, just to be thorough with the caveats, we also don't do anything like tripwire. So a lot of times when I'm teaching fundamentals, people will see the ordering, and they'll say, well, what if I don't want to manage the contents, but I do want this to restart if the file ever changes? We don't do that. All we do is if we managed it successfully, then use the refresh method of whatever this thing is.
Yeah, unfortunately, I've seen situations where people who have a Puppet infrastructure,
Mm-hmm.
they would shoot the DBAs in the foot because the DBAs try to deal with situations and Puppet would keep restoring the old configuration files.
Yes, which I would argue is what you want. But I've been to plenty of dysfunctional places where they had all their configuration into version control all set up, machines with fixed drift. Then we kick it over the wall to DBAs because they can't explain what they do. Then we kick it over to the application team who have Puppetized their application deploys. We have operations keeping it running. They have Puppet managing all their stuff. And so then you definitely can't do a DR kind of thing. So what I will do in those cases, and this is what I mean by failing therapy, is frequently a team will say Puppet broke it, which, you know, it's like, hey, why didn't you Puppetize it? But they'll say Puppet broke my hand edit in production because I have sudo. And what we'll do is show them the command to do a Puppet agent run no op, so that they can do a run and see if it would break anything.
I had an unfortunate situation where the Puppet was actually managing its own database.
Nice.
And the database started having a nervous breakdown and they couldn't do anything.
Well, you can disable the agent.
Yeah.
That's just Puppet agent -- disable. And people will do that when they have, when they're trying something out on a live system and need to make sure it works before they Puppetize it. Puppet agent -- disable. But yeah, it's Puppet is enthusiastic about getting your configuration drift taken care of. So sometimes, yeah, a little family therapy is involved. Yeah.
Will Puppet agents listen to exit codes on scripts like handwritten scripts?
Yeah. You are talking about an exec resource. Let me show you, even though it's dangerous and I hate them, how that goes. That is one of the built-in types. And before I show you that type, I'm going to show you a couple of the others so that you don't have to use it. Files take a bunch of different attributes, generally what you might expect, but also some cool ones. Path through the file, yawn. Ensure that it's a file or a directory or a symlink. If it's a symlink, there's a target attribute. Will I replace a file if it has changed? So you've got some help there with the DBAs changing things under you. Now you get a error on every run, but at least you haven't nuked their stuff. Let's see. Recursing has to do with directories. So I can serve static files to an agent, but I can also say there's a whole directory here. Grab it. Purge if I want to knock out things that weren't there. Content is how I do things from a template. And source is how I tell Puppet to just fetch a static file off the master. There are different providers to handle this, basically POSIX and Windows. But this provider also offers attributes that may not work on a system. So you know what you're doing, but sometimes you're Puppetizing a Red Hat system and the Debian people come along and say, awesome, we're going to use that. And then you've hardwired all sorts of terrible defaults. Or they're missing a subsystem, or somebody wants to manage something on Windows instead of Linux. Some providers do not have support for these on different platforms. So just watch out there. So file you're going to use a lot. Package, let's see. Is kind of boring. Name of the package. Ensure that it's installed or absent or purged. You can ensure that it's a particular version. And let's see. That's pretty much most of what you do. Source will let you actually aim at a package file, especially Windows.
Ensure a specific version. Is there a way to not care about version?
Yep.
So like
just say installed.
Okay. So that way it's not going to complain because you've got a newer version. Or
Right,
older version.
right. Yeah, most people will do installed. They're happy enough with that. High performance computing, you want to make sure it's the same version everywhere. And service. There is also a latest, yeah. That one.
Knocked over the filers.
Oh dear. Because they were saying
it
latest
patched at
every time?
6 a.m. on Monday, and from 4.2 to 4.3, and we just know the big
Huh.
file isn't compatible. So
Oh dear.
Dell threw out.
Ugh. Sorry.
Yeah.
What changed on that?
And then services, make sure things are running or that they'll start automatically in startup. I won't go into them too much in depth because I'm about to start looking at some Forge modules. And we'll go through these things. But there is exec, which will just run a command for you. And the important attribute to that, man, everybody's leaving me. An exec goes like this. Here's the command to run. Creates says if a certain file exists, you can assume this is already run. And that you may just be dropping a cookie into some directory somewhere. Let's see who to run as. Timeout, which you'll want to set up if you have something that's taking forever. Tries, it'll retry a couple of times. And the only if, there you are. And the unless attributes, these will run a command and based on the exit code decide whether to run this command. So if you want to reinvent the wheel, for instance, which I've seen a ton of people do, and this is why I showed you the other ones first, instead of using a package resource, they will actually have rpm-qa pipe into grep for the name of the thing. And that's their unless. So if it's in that list, don't exec a yum install of the thing. So try to avoid the exec if you can. You don't have to write your own types and providers on day one, so use it if you need to. But the nice thing is that in your log output for a real resource, Puppet will say that this package should be present, but it was absent, so I fixed it. Whereas in exec, it'll just say this command ran and succeeded. And returns is the one you were asking about. You can give it a list of exit codes that are okay. Ready? Want to try some stuff? Probably answer some questions in the process. Puppet Forge is one of the coolest things in the universe. It is a repository, as you might expect from the name Forge, of free code that people have shared. We just went over 4,000 modules to set up this thing. Now, a lot of them are duplicates, and I'm going to show you how to figure out which one is probably the best. Don't take my word for it. Let's go there. That is forge.puppetlabs.com. Oh, now it's forge.puppet.com, isn't it? And I can search. We also have a micro format in the page actually, so you can just say Forge and hit tab and write from your browser. So we're ready to look for some modules. These are free, although there's a space in the metadata for license, so You know, you could, for some crazy reason, put your code up on the Forge and then say somebody has to pay you for it. But free modules that other people have written. And if you write modules, I expect you all to upload them. Nice thing is they all pretty much link to a GitHub, so you can fork and fix them if you need to. And here I can search for whatever I need to set up. I've been using NTP as an example. We might as well look there. And it gives me a list of all the things that matched NTP. This is the person who created it on the left side, and this is the name of the module on the right side. I'll bet you almost all of them, the name is NTP, but sometimes it's NTP underscore server, whatever a person felt like doing. There is a metadata file inside every module that informs the Forge of what to put for description and compatibility and things like that, version. And I've got a couple of choices here. So I have to pick one. And I've done this a lot, so I'm going to show you how I do it. Number one, the Puppet Labs one is supported. Now, I expect probably most people in here are doing open source, which means you can't call up Puppet and be like, hey, fix this. Although our support people are very friendly, so they probably would fix it. And if it's broken, they're going to have to fix it eventually anyway. But that means if you're an enterprise person, you can actually call up. But it also means you can expect a certain code quality out of this. Run it through CI. We have automated tests everywhere. Great code coverage. That's what we require before we go to supported. There's also a type of module called approved, which means we're doing automated tests on it. We've looked at the code. We think it's good. The documentation works. Here I've got the number of downloads. So over 1 million for this one, partially because it's the example that we like to use often. Gareth, this is pretty good. This one's looking all right. And we have an automated assessment of the quality of it. So we've only got 4.9, and these have 5. They don't always sort this way, but these have won the battle here. I will look for download count as a general kind of thing, but as you know, the popular kids are not always the best. Frequently they're not. And sometimes somebody's just got their some sort of auto-scaling cluster aimed at their own version of the module, and their downloads are just all just huge. Other times you'll click on the one with the most downloads because you think it's the most promising, download it, try it, it doesn't work, and like everyone else, you move to the next one on the list, and so now that one is one more on its count. So sometimes they snowball. The next thing I look at is actually when it was last updated, which is over here. Got a version and when that came out. It's also showing me here how many downloads of this version happened. So you can actually see of the 1 million, not the entire thing on this version. If a module hasn't been touched in a long time, it tends to have been abandoned rather than having been perfect on the first go, and so they never had to re-release. So I care a lot about that. So this one's looking all right here. Garrett's looking okay. Puppet Labs is looking all right within 4 months. That's cool. And then what I'll do is click through and see it.
Is there any way to leave reviews or kind of
Yeah.
voting on that?
Yeah, if you log in, and a login just requires an email address, and I don't think it even adds you to marketing stuff. The Forge is its own group. Yeah, you can rate it. Most people don't bother. I mean, you should rate it, yes. So let's take a look. I'm going to take a look at the front runner here. Because it's got some good downloads, a recent release, recent enough for me, great compatibility. Parameters, those are my things I'll do. There you are. So I'll come back to my quick reference here. So the README says it'll take parameters, but it doesn't say what they are. And I want to have parameters. Gareth, darn it. So that's not very helpful. Because he's saying, look at the conf, but what are the parameters in the class? I don't know. Let's see. Oh, we do have a few of the parameters. Okay, that's good. All right. So listed them. Not a lot of description, but you don't need a lot of description for NTP. And then that's it. What I'll do next is look for the code. Now this README is thorough enough, tells me how the class works, but hasn't given me an example. And I really like examples. Let's see what we got. Manifests is where code lives. The main class goes in a file called init.pp. Let's take a look at what we got here. All right, here's our old friend, the class definition. Parentheses go around the parameters that it will take. And defaults are on this side. He's not using a params class. So, yeah, a little antisocial. It's using the main US ones. If you ever teach in New Zealand, they hate how those are. I think they have like 2 ISDN lines coming out of New Zealand. It's really sad. It's because Australia is giving them the connection. Let's see. That wasn't meant to be like a they don't like them thing. It was like Australia doesn't have a lot of bandwidth either. They have like one link to Singapore or something. All right, there's the end of my parameters. And now I'm going to start my code. Now, Gareth is good. He's running some functions here to make sure that his input is correct. That his parameters, like this, has status. He's using an isString function to make sure that he does have it. If it's come in and it's true, use it. If it isn't, all right. And then we'll get down to the resources. This is interesting. So Gareth is doing his params class basically inline in his main class. So case OS family right there. That generally belongs in a params class, but it doesn't really matter. All right. Oh, there we go. There's some useful stuff. Okay. Let's get to the monkey already. There we go. File. Ensure it's present. Admin file. Okay. Oh, that's cool. It's like we're in an if for Solaris. Package. This variable has been set in the case statement. This looks like it was written for Puppet 2. Kernel could be Linux or Windows or Darwin or whatever. Okay. Puppet runs on Cisco's and Aristas and things. File, cool. But he's not notifying the service to restart if he changes it. I'm going to bail out of this one. I'm not happy with it, although Gareth is a very smart person. But his popularity was, all the wind was taken out of his sails when the Puppet Labs one came out. But let's look at another one. All right. Ubuntu and Debian. Nice to spell that out since they're kind of the same. Let's see. Okay. Packages, files, and services, setup requirements. That's nice. He's telling me what I'll need. Here's an include. So he's got an example. I like examples. Here we go. Here's another one. All right. This is looking nice. I like this README. I mean, you know I'm going to use the Puppet Labs one, but for the sake of looking over a module and seeing if I like it. Plenty of examples. I love this. Great. Parameters. Beautiful with syntax highlighting and everything. Lovely. Let's look at the code too. Let's see if we have the class, params, and defined types. All right. Nice. Code goes in manifests. Generating templates come out of templates. Got some tests in here. This is fantastic. Let's take a look in here. All right. There we go. Main class is in init. Params has the case statement of doom. Want to take a look? Yeah, I definitely want to take a look. Okay. Let's see. All right. Okay. OS family. Okay. Doing an awful lot of work. A case statement would have done this better. Just a huge. These are all defaulting out. That's okay. This is somebody planning too much. That they may want support for other operating systems, so they're going to come up with every possible thing that could be different, and then hardwire them all. All right. Huh. All right. So it's a Debian module, so we don't need to care about other operating systems. But it does have a params class. Let's take a look at the main class. Awesome. Looks a lot like my example. You'll see this sometimes where we go to params for an OS specific value, but we default to something hardwired otherwise. Sometimes people will throw all this into params, sometimes boring things that don't care about the operating system family, they'll just throw them right in there. Cool. All right. So parameters will take, and cool. All right. This is nice. I like that. Now we're picking the right pool. Nice. Checking the input. That's all this is. Don't need to sweat it. And where did the params end? Oh, there's the end of the params. Cool. Okay. All right. Huh. This is one that you're going to see a bunch, so let me explain it. A class can include other classes. So people will write a wrapper class that then just includes a bunch of other things. It's super handy in a design pattern called roles and profiles, which I won't get into especially, where some machines get like the same classes always, and so you'll have like a wrapper class for Linux base that says include sudoers, include SSH, include INET, include all those kinds of things. So this is wrapping up 3 other classes here. We're doing it with parameter style, even though we don't have parameters, that's allowed. Class this, and here's the arrow that I was telling you about. Those are called chaining arrows. So it looks like our package file and service are hidden inside some other classes. Let's take a quick look. All right, install. There we are, package, config. There we are, config files. Service, let's guess what goes in there. Service. All right. Cool. Now Puppet Labs, I'll do a quick run through. Okay, some good examples. Excellent. Here's all I have to do. I'm not going to worry about multiple code environments, multiple masters, any of that kind of junk. I'm going to take this command, puppet module install. Gonzo is my puppet master. I'll install it. Puppet module install with the module name. It matches what's on the search page. It's the user and the name of the module. Module tool knows what dependencies there are. So it is installed NTP and the Puppet Labs standard library, which provides some nice functions. All right, let's take a look down here. Usage, servers, restrict. I don't care. I mean, this looks good, right? I just want NTP. What's the minimum I need? All right, I'm going to edit my site.pp file, which happens to be in here. Let's see, there's my default node. Let's get more specific than that. All right. View here. And now I'm going to do a real run. Test tells the Puppet agent to not bother demonizing, to stay in the foreground, to only run once, and to be very verbose. And there we go. When I said Puppet resource package NTP earlier and it said absent, purged. Now it'll tell me that it's here and what version it is. I've just set up NTP. Like that. What else we got? How about Apache? Well, there's one that's supported. Example 42 writes a ton of modules, and they're generally pretty good. Nice. Got some examples. Here's declaring the main class. Set it up. Here's a defined type. So this is a cookie cutter. This will be in the code. But let's just try using the Puppet Labs one. Yeah, it's still at 13 minutes. It's going to be cool. I'm going to make a WordPress server. And then it's going to be 13 minutes until it's rooted. Okay, so beginning with Apache. Cool, I can just include Apache. It's got a ton of parameters. Let's take a look at those. Let's see, I can make virtual hosts. Where are my parameters? Oh, I can even add modules. That's going to be handy in a second. All right. What's my other one? Rizzo? Oh, Kermit. I actually have a Windows 2012 machine running just in case anybody wanted to see that demo. I don't expect so, but the nice thing about resource abstraction is you don't have to know the commands. So if you like inherit a Windows machine, you throw Puppet on it, and you're like user something, it's your present. Let's see.
Is that the same if you don't know a configuration for a machine?
No, if you don't know configuration, you'll have to probably guess around a little bit, run Puppet resource to figure out the state of things.
If you're just starting off Puppet and you're like, this machine's been running for 5 years.
Oh.
What's actually been done on it?
No, unfortunately you can't. There are apps out there that'll try to figure that out. You give them a golden image and they'll figure out the drift, but we don't try to do it. Now what I've got here is an error because I didn't install it. So I'll install it. I'm going to pop back into the README here real quick and look for PHP. I definitely don't want SU PHP, although that would make it way easier to root. Let's see, where are you? Oh, la 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 la. Ah, there we go. Here is a description of how to add modules on. It's a class. So we have a main class that says set up Apache. And all I've done so far is include Apache. That's better. I've also got these for modules. Apache mod and the name of it. Okay. So on my next run, I'm going to add that in. I'm also going to need MySQL. So let's take a look. With PHP extensions in it. I'm just going to use Puppet Labs for the sake of time. Leave maybe 5 minutes for questions. And kick off another run here. Apache has now started. Because the configuration file was successfully managed and it kicked the server. And now I've got another include that says do the mod PHP stuff, and that'll just layer on now. Don't take my word for it. Oh, interesting. So in my desired state, what I want is don't do this at home. There's a module for managing firewall entries. There are a bunch of them, actually. Let's go back to the MySQL. We'll queue that up. Where'd you go? All right. Let's find some examples. Set up MySQL server, remove default accounts, override. Okay. All right. Yep. Okay. I've got defined types here that I can make a whole MySQL database. This is just a collection of resources. It hopefully is some Ruby code that's actually calling out to the server correctly, but it could just be an exec that's just running as the correct user. I've set up MySQL myself, so I know the root password because I set it. So now I can just reuse the password and create a database. I had a student once almost go into tears because they'd spent the previous 2 weeks trying to set up all their MySQL backups, and there's actually a defined type for them. And in 5 minutes, I ruined their day. But what I care about is the main one. There we go. And really all I care about is the root password. There are ways to encrypt things in your code using something called Hira YAML. I just want to get started here. It's class with a parameter. Arg. And nothing too exciting there. I'm kind of tidy about my arrows. Nobody will ever guess if I change the O into a 0. Nobody ever does that. So let's try it. Let's do a run. I've forgotten again to install a module. So it's going to go out to the forge. While that's downloading, I'll find PHP again in here. Oh, interesting. MySQL bindings. Now it's a private class, which means I'm not supposed to use it myself. So, this looks promising too. PHP enable. All right. MySQL bindings. Is this a class or a type? Let's see. I know it's a class. Did it say classes down here? It is a class. These are the parameters. So I can just say class something or other. With a parameter. Class MySQL bindings PHP enable is true. And all I'm doing at this point is running through Forge modules with their examples. I told you that Puppet will ensure things happen in an order if I tell it to. This module, MySQL Server, says it has to come before you bother trying to throw in a binding package. So I can put them in whatever order I like. I wouldn't do this to Chad. But I'll do it for you so that you can see they go in the right order. And now I'll do a run now that I've got the module installed. My firewall should be off by now. Maybe not. It is firewall D, right? It's okay.
Because you're going 4443 instead of 480.
Oh, am I?
Yeah.
Oh. Thank you. Sweet. So Apache's running, nothing in it. MySQL will be running. So the last piece is WordPress. Same deal as the others. There is no supported one. So I've got this one, which has a 5, and I've got this one, which has a 4.1. More downloads on this one. This one's more recent. Now I can go through here. And this is a WordPress module just for Enterprise 6. Probably work on 7. Let's see, usage. Okay, there's one example and nothing in the way of description. Sorry, Swizzle Sticks. I'm going to go with Hunter, who works for Puppet, and he's a very nice and very smart guy. Okay, what do we got here? All right, does all this stuff. Install dir, install URL, create DB user. These default to true. This is hopefully just going to plug right in. This parameter I'm going to use to cheat. Puppet module install. Oops, that's the other one I like. I'm going to cheat. I'm going to specify the install directory, and I'm going to throw it right into the document root of Apache. Let's see. I'll throw you down here, even though Hunter is already making sure he has dependencies set. And my node definition, nice, it fits on one page. So all I've done is my node includes classes. Those classes have a main class that sets up package file service, for instance, on Apache or MySQL. In Hunter's case, it's pull down and archive, expand it, and run. And that's what it's done. Var www.html, it has extracted it into there. It's an exec, which no doubt has a creates aimed at whatever, some file that this is going to create. So it'll only run once. Got some ownerships, MySQL database, MySQL grant. And this is always the interesting moment for me. What do you think? All right. Well, looks like he didn't restart MySQL. I'll do it the boring way. What's it called? Anybody remember?
Can you do it the Puppet way?
Well, if I don't know. I don't know the name. It's interesting. All right. Well, it's running. What do you think? I only have about 30 seconds to figure it out. That would be interesting. this is no fun. Well, if nobody can remember the name of it.
Is it oriented?
No.
That's what the logs.
Really? That would be something they just changed then. Wow. Nice. They just changed this week. All right. Puppet, let's see. System, CTL, restart, MariaDB. Hopefully it's compatible. All right, now let's try it. All right. Well, unfortunately, I'm broken. But ha! Yeah. So thank